So the topic of gender inclusivity have been discussed in different ways. I could show the statistics to you know just underscore the continual trends of underrepresentation of women and girls in STEM. However, personally, I prefer to tell stories. So in my sharing, I will be drawing on my case study research work in the area of gender studies conducted in the US and Singapore to discuss about gender inclusivity in STEM education. Specifically, I will be sharing case stories of 3 women who are STEM educators in school and the university. I will use their stories to politicize their experiences as women in STEM and STEM education. And finally, I will draw some implications for curriculum and teacher education. Like many people, I was gender blind. I was educated in a girls' school for 10 years during my elementary to middle school years. On retrospect, growing up in such an environment was a huge privilege. I never had to think about how embarrassing it would be for me to answer a question incorrectly in front of a male classmate. I do not have to compete against boys in mathematics or physics. My only main competitor, in fact, was my twin sister. I grew up feeling very confident of who I am and what I can achieve. In my world at that time, I was not exposed to the terms such as gender issues, gender inequality, gender disparity, or otherwise. Positionality is a construct, is a theoretical construct that I came to learn about from my feminist studies class during my PhD program. And subsequently, I learned more about this theoretical construct from Angela Barton's work in science education. In 2015, I wrote a paper using this theoretical construct to make sense of the marginalized experiences of 2 female teachers, one in the United States and one in Singapore. In that paper, I define positionality as recognizing and making sense of the workings of the factors and forces that constitute the politics of a context. In the following slides, I will be talking about these 2 teachers and as well as a female STEM university faculty to illuminate issues of gender in STEM school as well as in university context. So this is my case 1 for today. When I was pursuing my doctoral studies in the US, I did a research in a specialized STEM school for students gifted in math and science. I had wanted to interview a teacher in the school because she was the colleague of my case study participant. She was a Hispanic Latina in her 40s. She was originally from Puerto Rico. She told me that she had 2 teenage daughters. She had earned a doctoral degree in chemistry from a very well-known and highly ranked US university. And then she became a chemistry teacher at this particular STEM high school after her PhD. So while I had planned to interview her about her curriculum work at the school, she started telling me other things about herself during the interview. I remembered very clearly that the first question she asked me was, "Am I a Hispanic?" So the rest of the interview sessions was more like an informal chat session with her telling me about her personal experiences. So Rosalinda, just to highlight that all the names are pseudonyms in this presentation. So Rosalinda's achievements and experience was clearly just disjointed. She thought she had worked hard enough to get out of her abusive relationship and experience in Puerto Rico. She thought that her PhD certificate certification was sufficient as a symbolic capital in a meritocratic system that espouses social mobility. But her day-to-day experiences and interactions with people seems to suggest otherwise. So this was what she said to me. When people meet me, I say that I teach. And 99.9% of the people assume that I teach Spanish just because of my accent. And when I finally say that I teach chemistry, they go, really? Like that's really different. Because people like me don't go into the sciences. It's a stereotype. I'm from a culture that people expect me to be dumb. So I'm going to let you listen to these two different intonations of the word really. I'm not sure whether you can hear it, but I will try. So this is the first version of the really with I would say a higher intonation.
Really?
Can everyone hear that? I'll try again, okay? Let's make it, that's the loudest I can go.
Really?
Okay, I hope that you can hear this. And then the second really sounds like this.
Really?
I play again.
Really?
So you realize that it is the same word, really, but it is said in two different intonations. And she hear it in the conversations with people. When they say, really? Isn't like, are you sure? And really? Wow, that is surprising to me. So she noticed that nuances in people's responses, and she continued to believe that there is stereotype. And this particular kind of stereotype is cultural as well as gendered. So Rosalinda also shared other experiences about her daughter, which, who was not allowed to join the AP chemistry class because her daughter was perceived to be not good enough for it. And that if she had taken the AP class, she would struggle. So just to put this, to share the context, AP classes are usually offered in the senior high school years for the higher ability students in the US. So many of the classes are white or Asian American dominated. So Rosalinda had shared that she had to go down to the school to meet her daughter's teacher to try to convince the teacher that her daughter was good enough for the program. Well, essentially, this set of experiences led to the construction of her political positionality. At the STEM school, where Rosalinda was teaching, she recognized that the majority of the girls in her school were struggling with school work. They tend to form cliques and they do not intermingle very well with the rest of the school population. So what she did was to set up a solidarity group for girls to speak in confidence, to share personal experiences, and to socialize. She spent her time on weekends to provide personal coaching for the girls because the school was a residential school and some girls did not go home on weekends. However, it is interesting to note that Rosalinda did not think that she treated her students differently based on race. So in her chemistry class, she expected the minority girls in the school, in her class, to work just as hard and to perform just as well. Her argument was that she herself had succeeded from putting in hard work. So the minority girls could succeed if they also put in effort in working hard. So in writing my narrative in a confessional style in my paper, I raised questions about the meritocracy myth. If hard work was all that mattered, then why did Rosalinda hear two different intonations of the same word? which seemed to suggest that her hard work had earned her a symbolic capital, but not the STEM capital. So several years after my first acquaintance with Roslinda, I got to know a Singaporean teacher. So this was how, a little bit of information about her demographic. She's a Chinese Singaporean at a time in her late 30s. She was single, and she described herself as coming from a lower socio-economic status background, and she used the term working class. She described the place where she stayed when she was young as old, dusty, infested, and cramped. She earned a bachelor's degree in biology, and all this while, even today, she's still teaching in an all-girls school. So I was very curious to find out if Lilin's perception of gender and her experience and what was her experience being a science teacher. So this was totally exploratory in nature. I wasn't confident that I would get anything, really of good empirical, value in that, correspondence with her. So I sent an email with some questions. It started off with some email questions about her views about the nature of science, science teaching experience. And then one of my last few questions were related to gender. So in one of her responses, she shared about her experience as a young teacher in the school. So she said, so Lillian actually related to an experience where she posed a question to the principal during a meeting, because the principal had mentioned about the need to maintain high standards. So Lillian shared that when she asked the question about, so what is high standards? And then the principal threw the question back at her. So what do you think is high standards? She said, I didn't feel any embarrassment. However, after the meeting, her head of department kind of like scolded her, kind of like insinuated in her message that she shouldn't have asked that question. It was only then that she felt embarrassed. So ever since then, she decided that she would not say anything. She would not ask anything, and she would only voice something if she had thought through many, many times over. So this was a very interesting experience, which can be described as the silencing of Lilin. She didn't write much in her email, so I thought about asking her to tell me more. So, the main difference between doing research work, in my personal experience, doing research work in the US and in Singapore, is that in the US, you can ask a question and you will get very long responses. But in Singapore, you tend to ask, a lot of questions, and you might just get one or two sentence response. So you really have to do a lot more probing, doing research in Singapore. So then I send her, some emails, follow-up emails to ask her more questions. So instead of just asking her directly, I decided to use a story to invite Lilin to reflect and respond to that particular story. So it was a story that was written by Banu Subramaniam in 2000. The title of the article was it's a short book chapter on Snow Brown and the 7 Detergents. So this was a short story about a brown-skinned girl from the Orient who wanted to leave her hometown and become a scientist. So in her pursuit to become successful in the department of the pursuit of scientific truth and live up to the expectations of the white patriarchs, that she decided to use 7 detergents to remove her name, her accent, her third world mentality, which in that paper was described as laziness, and then she wanted to remove her emotions, her subjectivity, her overconfidence, and her brownness. So in the end, she lost her self-identity, and she did not succeed because she became too beautiful to be a scientist. So the story was shared with Lilin to provoke her critical reflections about science. That was not, just to bring across the message that science is not asocial nor acultural. So then she shared this particular story about herself being silenced, and that this particular experience raised her class consciousness. So this her dynamic positionality was derived from the reconstructed understanding of the school culture, which is very much inscribed in the continual imbalanced power relationship and struggles in the larger cultural, social, and political context of individual lives. And so this resulted in her that until today, she decided that she would take a more passive stance when it comes to making voicing out in any school-wide decisions and meetings. So currently, I'm working on a survey study on female university STEM faculty's views on gender equity. So the response rate, by the way, was very low. We have tried reaching out to many STEM faculties, and to date, I'm still getting a single-digit response. So in the design and validation of our survey, we interviewed a university professor to gain some insights on her gendered experiences as an engineering professor. So I call her Bridget, and from my conversation with her, clearly she felt really out of place. So this was what she basically, why is she out of place? She's young. In fact, she was the youngest. She said that on the average, the people in her department are about 55 years old. There are 100 over faculty members, but only 3 female, and she's one of the female and the youngest one. So we asked her questions like, has this got to do with, just being a woman? She said, no, I think it's a combination of being young and being a woman at the same time. She didn't understand why people will keep calling her prof or call her doctor when, she, or even call her miss, instead of calling her by her first name. And I explained to her that's really cultural as well and institutional. She says that she tends to ask a lot of questions because she doesn't think that she knows everything, right? But then, people will find her weird because she's asking so many questions. And then she said that she find herself sometimes attending meetings when, it has pretty much nothing relevant to her work, and she has nothing much to say. And she's probably there because she is a woman. And what was interesting as well is that in her department, in her building, there are no female restrooms. So that really troubled her quite a bit. So these experiences that Bridget shared alluded to her relational positionality. She interpreted her experience as not being understood and that her presence was more symbolic than real. So I realized I forgot to click. So the case, so what I've shared here are 3 case stories of 3 ladies who are very different and responded differently to the various circumstances. So Rosalinda's positionality was political because of the intersectionality of her race and gender. Lilin's positionality was dynamic. As mentioned, she decided that she would stay silent, and it is a form of quiet resistance to the hegemonic school structures. And then in Bridget's case, her relational positionality was illuminated in her description of her relationship with her colleagues and her department. So here I would like to draw on the words of wisdom from scholars to point out that, well, qualitatively improved experiences should parallel the quantitative increase in women, not only minority women, but women in the STEM fields. Otherwise, the paradox of critical mass will continue to persist. And having sufficient, so what this first paragraph points out is that having sufficient numerical representation of women is good, but it's not sufficient. It's good, but not sufficient to address the problems of the underrepresentation of women in STEM. So I argue that it would be more constructive in addressing the challenges of women's experiences while becoming and being a female STEM professional. But how can women in general and STEM educators do this? So, as James Baldwin has said, one of the paradoxes of education that precisely is that precisely at the point when you begin to develop a conscience, which is a critical consciousness, you must find yourself at war with your society. Now, this is a very strong statement, and I do not think that we should take it literally. As educators, I propose that we can develop this critical consciousness by first, number one, politicizing the personal. That means, for example, if somebody says to me that, well, I don't think there's any gender bias, what is the issue? Now, I think instead of this person trying to defend that there is no gender bias, to ask the question, why didn't I think that there was a gender issue? So it's interrogating the missing narratives in the construction of the self. The second one is to politicize the social historical. That means to understand where's the origins of the stigma or the stereotype. Where did it come from? And how did it evolve? For all they know, maybe there is no good basis for that stigma or that stereotype. And the last one is institutional, which is to identify constructive solutions to remove barriers and to be unapologetic about doing that. So the implications for the next one, which I want to talk about, is that the solution is really not as simple as just pinkifying or pinkification of various products so that it looks more feminine and then it will address women's needs. This is really very superficial. So this is, I think, my second last slide here. I just want to highlight that in school STEM programs and STEM teacher education programs, we often talk about STEM curriculum design. A lot of STEM activities tends to be hands-on, right? People, just run a program, everybody just jump in and start, building stuff, so this is like the maker culture. And it tends to be problem-centric, right? So people would usually, embed that particular STEM activity within the real-world problem. But what I think is that it can definitely be more purposeful in promoting understandings of gender inclusivity. So take, for instance, if you take a look at this bag in this picture, it was actually a simple solution to enhance the safety of women who gets robbed, right? If they should get robbed. So snatch thieves, so people who would just, run from the back of women and pull their bag and snatch their handbags. Snatch thieves usually target women. If a snatch thief were to grab a woman's handbag, the woman could easily fall and have a really bad fall. And we have also known of a case where women had died. So changing a permanent strap into one of these which are detachables allow the strap to be disconnected safely in the event that it's being snatched away, so that the impact of the jerk that caused the fall can be reduced. Now, this is a simple solution, but the reality is that this particular solution, which was intended to benefit women, had ended up benefiting men as well, because men also carry business bags with straps. So then you ask me this question, so where's the positionality that you were talking about now? So as a STEM educator, imagine this, I'm a teacher, I present this problem to students, okay? And I said, okay, the problem that we're trying to solve today has to do with the safety of women. So now my students will engage in divergent thinking about the various kinds of safety issues that are specific to women. In order to identify this problem, they will start thinking about their own gender. So as a woman, what are some of the safety issues that I experience? As a man, what are some safety issues that a woman would experience, right? They will start invoking their gender. And how much they understand, and once they invoke their gender, they realize that, hey, actually, I know a lot more, or I don't really know the problems that women face in terms of safety. So that's when, in the process, they will have a better understanding of the personnel, right? So they will ask questions, and when they start working on it, they will ask questions such as like, why is this issue specific to women? Why does it not affect men as much? So this is where they will start to politicize their individual experiences with the contextual issues. So, for example, they will say, oh, so, okay, so we are talking about this issue about women being robbed. The question is, why do women get robbed in the streets? Why do men get robbed less often than women in terms of the statistics? Why is that so? It could be, for example, the perception that women run slower, they are weaker to fight back, right? So during such conversations, they will start to interrogate such assumptions. And then the students can now work in groups with the male and female team members to examine the issues that women confront. There will be diverse viewpoints, and in the process, the male participants develop better understanding of the problems that women face. They learn to listen to women more.
Excuse me,
Yes?
Professor Tang.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to disrupt you
Yeah.
because we have limited time. So could you please make a quick conclusion?
Yes. Yeah. It's
Thank
only
you.
one last sentence. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry. So there's this basically the reconciliation of the self, the others, and the context. So what I'm saying here is that positionality may be used as a tool for reflective and reflexive STEM curriculum making. So that's actually my last sentence. So thank you very much
Okay.
for your attention. Thank you.